Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today we're going to see how well I did on my reading plans for 2021. At the start of the year I made a video called My Reading Plans for 2021 and in it I talked about the books I want to read, the authors I wanted to try and one particular reading challenge I was going to participate in. And since we're nearing the end of the year, I thought it would be fun to see how well I did with those plans and if I managed to stick to them. So first of all, we're going to go through my list of 10 books I want to read in 2021. If you've been around on my channel for a while, you will probably have heard me talk about this before, because I make a list every year of 10 books I want to read in that year. And that's basically my list of 10 books I have to read. If I will have read anything by the end of the year, it will have been those 10 books. At least that's the idea. And I always put books on those lists that are on my shelves. So no new books, only books that have been on my shelves at the start of that year. Mostly books that have been on my shelves for quite a while. Some of them have been there for years, some of them for a couple of months. But this list is my priority each year and it is the list that I will stick to, like I said. And because of that, I usually put books on there that are quite intimidating to me. They are books that I really do want to read, but they scare me somehow. Maybe because they're long or they're dense or I've heard they're difficult. And this list kind of forces me to read them. And this year, as you might have guessed from my little introduction there, I managed to finish all of the books. And my extra goal for this year was to not leave the last book until the very end of the year, but just comfortably finish them before then. So I finished the final book about a week ago, I think. So near the start of December instead of near the very end. So that means I won't have a stressful reading time at the very end of the year, which is fun and a bit of a change from the previous few years. So I'm not going to review all of these because then we'll be here for a very long time because I've got quite a few books to go through. But I'm just going to go through the books, tell you whether I like them or not. I think that's the best plan for this video. And these are also not in chronological order from when I read them, because I just took them out of my shelves based on my list in my bullet journal, which I stopped using about halfway through the year. But I did still fill in this list because that's satisfying. So let's start with the most intimidating book I read all the year. It was The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 stars, I think. It took me quite a while to read because it's long, it's dense and it's intimidating, but I did really enjoy it, so I'm very glad I've now read it. Then we've got He Forgot to Say Goodbye by Benjamin Alira-Sanz. This was the final book on my shelves left by this author at the start of the year. We'll see this author again later this video. And I gave this 4 stars, I think. Again, yes, 4 stars. There are also always a couple of classics on this list because I tend to not pick up classics randomly. They really do have to be on a TBR for me to read them, even though I do enjoy them. And this year one of those classics was Agnes by Anne Bronte. I love Anne Bronte. She might be my favorite Bronte sister now. This is her debut novel, I think. This was her first novel and I didn't enjoy it as much as The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, but I did really enjoy her writing style. Next up is a poetry collection and it is She is Fierce by Anna Sampson. This is a collection of brave, bold and beautiful poems by women. This is another one of those books that I will want to read, but because I don't read a lot of poetry, it's just not at the forefront of my brain and I just tend to not pick it up, which is why it was on this list. This was a gift from my boyfriend and I really enjoyed it. I did think it could have been structured a little bit better and I must admit that I've forgotten most of the poetry from this already, but that's mostly also to do with me just not being a big poetry fan. I did really enjoy this. Next up is History of Wolves by Emily Fritland. This was a book that my parents gave to me, I think in 2017 for my birthday, and it had been on my shelves ever since and I just kept forgetting about it, which is why I put it on my list for this year, and I really enjoyed it. I'm so glad I've now read it. It was a very interesting novel, very atmospheric. It had some interesting themes and discussions and it was a great pick for this list. Then there's another intimidating novel and it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I read in November. So if you've not yet seen my November wrap-up and want to know my full review of this book, I'll leave a link up above or down below. I might even make a playlist out of all of the wrap-ups I've done this year because they will contain reviews for all of the books I'm mentioning here. The Secret History, it was on this list because it's so intimidating, just like The Name of the Rose. I really enjoyed it, but I also have mixed feelings on it. I loved book 1, 5-star material. Book 2 was disappointing to me. Then we've got A Symmetry by Lisa Halliday, which was a gift from my parents-in-law a couple of years ago for Christmas. I enjoyed this, but not as much as I'd hoped. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I'm not entirely sure. I also didn't fully understand this when I'd finished, and I had to look things up to see how everything was interconnected and how this novel really worked, which I thought was a bit of a bummer. Then we've got The Red Notebook by Paul Auster, which was actually the final book out of this list that I finished. I finished it about a week ago, like I said. This is a collection of essays, interviews, and just general wanderings by Paul Auster. There are a few prefaces in here that felt very random and weren't necessarily things I really wanted to read, but the pieces that he wrote and the interviews done with him on writing and on why he writes and how he comes to write the things that he does were really very interesting and I loved very much. Then there's the second classic of this list, and it is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which is another one of those books that I've been wanting to read for years and years and years. I bought this copy a few years ago, but I already had it on my radar before then, because this is one of those classics that a lot of people really seem to love. And it's the first science fiction novel, and Mary Shelley wrote it when she was 18, so I've always just been very intrigued by it. And it wasn't as good as I'd hoped, or maybe I just had too high expectations, but I did really enjoy it. I really loved the writing style, and I loved just finally experiencing this story. And then the 10th book of this list is Troy by Stephen Fry. This is a retelling of the Trojan War. I really enjoyed this. I love Stephen Fry's writing style. I'm really looking forward to the 4th book in this series, because this is the 3rd one. And in the 4th book he's going to retell the Odyssey, and it will come out in the autumn of 2022, I think. So those were the 10 books I had to read in 2021. I think it was a very successful year for this list, because I enjoyed all of these books. There were some I enjoyed a little bit less than I'd hoped, but none of them I outright disliked. So that's really good. I was doubting whether or not I was going to make another one of these lists for next year, but I think I will, and just add a few more books on there I really, really want to get to, and fewer books that are really intimidating to me, because that's kind of what I experienced this year. There were a couple of books I wasn't really looking forward to that much, even though I did want to read them at some point. So I'm going to make it a bit more fun for me next year, and maybe add some newer books to the list as well. So then we're moving on to the next part of my reading plans for this year, and those were books by authors I had never read from before. At the end of 2020 I made a video of 6 authors I really wanted to read something from in the next year, because they were authors I'd heard about a lot on BookTube or Bookstagram or wherever, and I had never read anything from them before, and I really wanted to change that. So I picked out 6 books by these authors. Not 6 books per author, just 6 books in total. And I set myself the goal to read all of them. I managed to read 5 of them. The 6th one I didn't get to, but I am going to put it on my list of 10 books to read in 2022. So I will get to it hopefully soon. Maybe I'll even try to read it in January. So let's just go through this list as well. The first author I wanted to read from is Samantha Shannon. She wrote The Bone Season. I'm not sure if that's the name of the series or just the first book, but she also wrote The Priory of the Orange Tree, and I already had this one on my shelves as well. There were a few books from this list that I had to buy new, actually most of them, but there were also 2 I already owned. The Priory is one of them. This is a very big book. It is definitely the biggest book I've read this year, and it took me most of February to read it. I wasn't as blown away by it as I'd hoped. I really liked the start of the book. I really adored the world and the characters, but the conclusion of the book felt a bit too easy for me. I was a bit disappointed by it. But I do really love Samantha Shannon's writing style, so I really do want to try The Bone Season next year. Another author I really wanted to read something from was James Baldwin, so I picked up Giovanni's Room, which is probably his most popular book, at least here on BookTube. Unfortunately, this was really disappointing to me. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I really didn't enjoy it very much. I know it's very popular, it's a staple in gay literature, and it really meant a lot in gay literature as well. I just didn't like the characters, and I didn't like the writing style, and I was just mostly annoyed while reading it. So that's really a bummer, but I do want to read more by James Baldwin, because I do think it really was this story specifically that I just didn't enjoy, and I am still very much interested in him as a thinker and a writer. Next up is Anna Marie Mclemore, and the book I decided to try from her was When the Moon Was Ours. This author writes magical realism young adult novels, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, as is the case with a lot of these books. I thought the writing was absolutely beautiful. It definitely fits with the magical realism vibes. It's atmospheric, it's flowery, and a bit strange, but in a really fun and beautiful way. I didn't fully connect to the characters, which is why I didn't get the full 5 stars, but the story was really weird. I love the writing style and I really want to read more of their books in the future. So definitely a successful experiment. Next up is a book that also definitely was a successful experiment, and it is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula Guin. I had never read anything from her before, and she has read many different books that have many different reactions to them. I decided to try this book because it's about dreams and dreamers, and I love stories about dreams and dreamers, and this ended up being my favorite book of the year. Along with one other book. I still don't know how I'm going to choose between these two, but I guess you'll have to find out which one I've chosen in my favorites video, which will go up at some point once I decide to film it. But yes, 5 stars, no doubt about it. I absolutely adored this, and I really do want to read much more by Ursula Guin. Then there's N.K. Jemisin, and I decided to pick up the 5th season, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. I'm actually still reading this. I am about 70 pages from the end. 60 pages from the end even, so I hope to finish this today or tomorrow, so I'll definitely be able to finish it before the end of the year. I'm really loving this, I'm adoring this book. I do want to read the rest of the series as soon as possible because I'm so intrigued with this world and with everything that's going on with the, I don't really want to call it magic because it's not really presented as magic, but with all the forces going on here, it's really cool, and I really want to read N.K. Jemisin's other books as well. And then the last book on this list is the one that I didn't get to, and it is a book by Aaron Morgenstern. It is of course The Night Circus. This was the other book I already had on my shelves, but I just didn't get around to this. This is also a little bit intimidating to me, I'm not sure why. It's so many people's favorite book. I really do want to read The Starless Sea as well. Maybe I should have picked up that one instead of this one, but I already had this one, so this is the one I'm going to read. And like I said, I hope to get to it in January right away. And then there was one last aspect to my reading plans of 2021, and that was the Buzzword Reading Challenge, which was created by Kayla from Books and Lala. Throughout the year I kept forgetting I was participating in this, but the idea is that there was a list of buzzwords, one for each month, a list of words that frequently appear in titles, and the idea is to read one book, or however many books you want, with that word in the title. So I decided to go for one book a month, and for January the buzzword was dream, and I didn't have a book on my shelves with the word dream in the title that I hadn't already read. So I had my pick of books that I could read because I could just read anything I wanted, and I decided to go for The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker, and I really hit the jackpot because I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 5 stars. Again, it's a book about dreams and dreamers, so I really couldn't go wrong. This will also definitely make my list of 10 favorite books, because it was great. And I probably or definitely wouldn't have read it if it hadn't been for the Buzzword Reading Challenge, so that's really cool. The buzzword for February was to read a book with a color in the title, and for that I decided to go for The Priory of the Orange Tree, which I already talked about, but orange, so it fits. The buzzword for March was time, and for that I decided to pick up Maybe This Time by Jill Mansell, which is a book that had been on my shelves for quite some time. And unfortunately I didn't like this. I really love Jill Mansell's books. I've read a lot of them. They're cozy, they're fun, but this one just annoyed me. So I really wouldn't recommend this one if you want to try Jill Mansell's romance novels. Then for April the idea was to read a book with space or galaxy words in the title, and for that I chose The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers, which has the word galaxy in it. This is the 4th book in the Wayfarer series, which you might know is my all-time favorite series. I cried a little bit at the end of this because I was sad it was over, because it's also the final book, but I absolutely loved it, and it's definitely one of the most beautiful books I own as well. Then for May the buzzword was house or home, and for that I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I really wasn't planning on picking up this book anytime soon. I bought it only because it was 50% off and because I love Leigh Bardugo, but I wasn't really all that hyped for this book because I'd seen a lot of mixed reviews. But then, because the buzzword was house or home, and this was the only book on my shelves that I hadn't read yet with that word in the title, I just decided to go for it and read it, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I thought this was such a wild, amazing ride of a book, and I really can't wait for the sequel. Then for June the prompt was to read a book with a name or a title, like king, queen, something like that, in the title. And for this one I chose Frankenstein, which I also already talked about, but Frankenstein is a name, so it fits. For July, the buzzword was last, and I didn't have a book on my shelves with the word last in it, and also I kind of forgot about the buzzword reading challenge at this point, so I quickly ordered One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston and added it to my DBR for a readathon I was doing that month. I'm not really sure which one it was, but this was definitely a last minute edition. And I really loved Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which I read earlier in the year, but this one was a bit disappointing. I really loved the characters, I loved their dynamics, I loved how it was set in New York, but the main mystery or the main story of this story just wasn't very satisfying to me. Then for August, the prompt was to read a book with a time of day in the title, and for that I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which is of course a very popular book on BookTube and just the world in general, and unfortunately I don't really see the hype. I thought this book was very obvious, very easy, the plot just didn't work very well. It didn't go as deep as I'd hoped it would go, so it was a 3-star read for me. I liked the message of the book, but I really wasn't blown away by it. Quite the contrary, actually. In September, the buzzword was dark, and this month I also participated in the Magical Readathon, so I had quite a TBR already. And I don't think I had a book with dark in the title on my shelves, so I read a short story from The Call of Cthulhu and Other Weird Stories by H.P. Lovecraft. This is a book I gave to my boyfriend as a gift, and The Haunter of the Dark is the final story in this book, and it's also the last story that H.P. Lovecraft ever wrote or published. It was my first H.P. Lovecraft story, and it was okay. I liked the writing style. I didn't think it was particularly scary or creepy, but it was definitely atmospheric and I had a good time reading it, so it was fine. Then in October, the prompt was to read a book with one of the elements in the title, so water, fire, earth or air, and I read my most disappointing book of the entire year, and you can maybe guess what's coming. It was Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World by Benjamin Alira Sands. There is the second Sands book I mentioned earlier in this video. This is the sequel to Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and I was highly anticipating this sequel, but unfortunately I didn't enjoy it. It was alright, but mostly it was just very disappointing because I had such high hopes for it. The buzzword for November was lost, and I didn't have any books on my shelves with the word lost in it that I hadn't already read, except for Paradise Lost, which I don't really want to read. So I went for The Spellbook of the Lost and Found by Moira Fowley Doyle, which I read as an ebook, and I really enjoyed this. It was very atmospheric, it was very creepy at times, there was a lot of suspense, and it also reminded me a bit of the Anna Marie Mclemore book I read earlier in the year, When the Moon Was Ours, which I mentioned earlier this video. It was really cool. And this was actually an author I really wanted to try something from, but they didn't make the list for one reason or another, so I'm really glad that I managed to read a full novel by them this year anyway. And then for December, the prompt is to read a book with a day, a month or a year or a season, something like that in the title, and for that I'm still reading The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which I already mentioned as well. So we've come full circle. I managed to stick to this reading challenge the entire year, even though I did forget about it every now and then. It was a lot of fun, and it is being hosted next year again as well. The buzzwords are slightly easier next year, which I really like because these were a little bit difficult sometimes, a bit challenging, but then again it is a challenge, so that's alright. I feel really accomplished seeing all of these books that I read this year in a big stack, or a few big stacks, because otherwise they would fall down, here on the table right beside the camera, which you can see. It feels so nice to see all of these books, most of which I really enjoyed, and they're not even half of all the books I read in 2021. It just makes me feel good about my reading, so I'm glad I decided to film this video. I didn't mention my Goodreads challenge in this video because I only now thought of it. I set my goal for the Goodreads challenge to 50 books, and I've now read 72 of them, so I definitely managed to reach that goal as well. So that's that for this video. In a comment down below, please let me know if you had any reading goals for 2021. Did you manage to reach them, and read them maybe? I don't know what your goals were. Have you read any of the books that I mentioned? Are they still on your TBR? Let's just chat in the comments. I always love getting comments and chatting to you guys. Please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of me in the future, and have a wonderful day. Bye!